Tyreek Hill has been at the center of trade rumors all offseason, and honestly, there's only one person fueling the fire: Tyreek himself. As I'm making this video today, Hill is already back on social media asking why people think he's getting traded. Well, Tyreek, maybe it's because you keep posting cryptic messages that leave fans guessing. Over the weekend, he threw up his signature peace sign, along with several tweets that seem to hint at a potential trade. And let's be real, when a player of his caliber starts making those kinds of posts, teams around the league take notice. Naturally, this has led to questions about whether the Raiders could be in the mix. But before we dive deeper into that, make sure you're part of the conversation. Before listening to the latest news, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and don't forget to press the bell icon. Let's move on to the new news. We already know the Raiders are actively searching for wide receivers. The team even brought in Hunter Renfrow for a visit, which means they're looking at all possible options. So, when fans see Hill posting these cryptic messages while the Raiders are exploring receiver options, the question becomes inevitable. Are the Raiders preparing to make a move for Tyreek Hill? That's exactly what we're here to discuss. If a trade happens, it would likely be sooner rather than later. And if Miami were to move on from Hill before June 1st, the Dolphins would have to eat a massive $28.3 million in dead cap for 2025. So, is this just social media noise, or is there something real brewing behind the scenes? Let's get into it. If the Raiders were to make a move for Tyreek Hill after June 1st, the financial impact would be slightly different. Miami would save some extra money, but there's no clear timeline for a trade. When Hill was originally traded from Kansas City to Miami, the Dolphins restructured his contract, adding 3 void years at the back end. That makes his situation a little more complicated. But here's the interesting part. Miami's front office may have always seen this as a short-term move. According to overthecap, the way Hill's contract was structured suggests they were open to moving him again. While his guaranteed money for 2025 is high, his actual salary ranks just 5th among NFL receivers, making him a tradable asset. Plus, Miami didn't include a massive roster bonus for 2025, which means they have flexibility in deciding his future. Here's where things get even more intriguing. Miami set Hill's option bonus at $15.85 million, but tied it to the start of the regular season instead of the usual early-year payout. This gives them a long window to work out a potential trade while keeping his cap hit under $28 million. And because he has no injury protection in 2026, teams interested in Hill don't have to worry about long-term financial risks. Naturally, this has sparked plenty of debate among Raiders fans. The idea of Las Vegas making a move for Hill has been floating around for a while. I even discussed this over a month ago in a mailbag session. But with the latest rumors and Hill's cryptic social media activity, it's time for a fresh breakdown. Should the Raiders make a move? Would it be worth the cost? And most importantly, will it actually happen? If the Raiders do trade for Tyreek Hill, you already know I'll be going live with full coverage. And trust me, it's going to be an epic show. But for now, let's break this down. What are the real chances of the Raiders pulling this off? So, could the Raiders actually pull off a trade for Tyreek Hill? By the time you finish watching this, you'll either be convinced it's possible or certain it's not happening. And, at the end of today's breakdown, I'll give you my strongest take yet on whether this move makes sense for the Silver and Black. NFL analyst Adam Rank recently linked Hill to the Raiders after all his cryptic social media activity. But this isn't just about Hill's tweets, it's about the Raiders' aggressive approach this offseason. Las Vegas has been linked to several big-name receivers, including DK Metcalf. They reportedly made a strong push for him, but Pittsburgh was ultimately more aggressive. The team has also explored moves for players like Matthew Stafford and Geno Smith, proving that this front office isn't afraid to make bold decisions. Now, we know the Raiders are searching for a true number one wide receiver. Bringing in Hunter Renfrow for a visit makes it clear they're actively looking to strengthen the position. And with the draft coming up, it's highly likely they'll target a receiver. But could they make a move for a star before then? Absolutely. Let's talk about Hill's performance. Yes, some might say he had a down year, but let's be honest. 81 catches, 959 yards, and 6 touchdowns is still elite production. The only reason he's making the kind of money he is today is because of what he did in his early years with Kansas City and his first seasons in Miami. His speed, unmatched. His playmaking ability, game-changing. That's why they call him the Cheetah. Now, here's where I want to hear from you, Raiders fans. Would you take the risk and go all in on Tyreek Hill? Let's break it all down. Just because a superstar player is on the trade market doesn't mean the Raiders should make a move. So, here's the big question. Trade or pass? Should the Raiders go after Tyreek Hill? My answer? No chance. And I'm not just saying that for no reason. There's a huge reason why the Raiders will never trade for Tyreek Hill. Every time I get a question about a possible trade, I ask myself, is this even realistic? In this case, the answer is 99.9% no. Fans who don't follow the Raiders closely might be wondering, why wouldn't we try to get one of the best wide receivers in the league? But those who know the history of this franchise understand exactly why this trade is highly unlikely. There's something that happened years ago that many newer Raiders fans might not even be aware of. And that one event, along with a few other key reasons, makes a Hill to Raiders trade almost impossible. So, let's break it all down. Why won't the Raiders trade for Tyreek Hill? Stick around because this is where things get really interesting. Let's break it down. The rumors about Tyreek Hill and the Raiders? Sure, they're buzzing. But the reality is Las Vegas will not trade for him. And here's why. First and foremost, he's too expensive. At first glance, his base salary might seem reasonable, just $10 million. Sounds like a steal, right? But that's where the hidden costs come in. Hill has a per-game roster bonus of $1.8 million. That means by the end of the season, the total cost to the Raiders would skyrocket to over $40 million. Now ask yourself, does that fit with what the Raiders are building? Absolutely not. This front office has been careful and strategic with money. They've been focused on smart spending, not reckless splashes. If they wanted to make a blockbuster trade for a receiver, it would have been for someone like DK Metcalf, who already has a connection with Pete Carroll. But a one-year high-cost gamble on Tyreek Hill, that's not the Raiders' strategy. And that brings us to the bigger question. Why would they risk that much for a player who doesn't fit their long-term vision? Stick around, because there's more to this story. Let's be real. Tyreek Hill is never coming to the Raiders. We've already talked about the money. If the Raiders keep him through 2026, his cap hit would explode to $53 million. That's just not realistic for any team, let alone one that's being smart and disciplined with spending. But here's the real reason this trade will never happen. There's something called the biletnikoff rule in Raiders history. If you're a die-hard fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If not, here's the short version. The Raiders have a zero-tolerance stance on players with domestic violence histories. Back in 2015, the Raiders partnered with the Biletnikoff Foundation and Tracy's Place of Hope, organizations dedicated to helping survivors of domestic abuse. That was a clear message from the franchise. This is a line they will never cross. And yet, here we are, talking about a potential trade for Tyreek Hill, a player with a past incident tied to this very issue. Do you really think Mark Davis, a man who has consistently stood by this principle, would go against everything the Raiders stand for? No chance. This front office has been careful, calculated, and intentional in free agency and the draft. They're focused on building a strong, high-character locker room. Throwing $40+ million at a player who doesn't fit that mold? It's not happening. Look, this is the NFL, so I'll never say anything is completely impossible. But if you're asking me to put a percentage on it, 0.1%, and that's being generous. So let's put this rumor to rest. Tyreek Hill will never be a Raider.